This is TWiT.
So the first, you split your book up into three kind of main movements, and it's very appropriate. The first third of the book, around that much, anyways, is really focused on the beginnings of Plato. What exactly is happening? And I guess this is like the late 50s, early 60s when Plato is first being developed. What's happening in the world that leads to this movement, and is there anything else kind of comparable to it at this point in this particular application setting?
Well, I mean, the real catalyst for all this stuff, remember, understanding that the mission of Plato from day one was about education. That was the focus. That was the goal, and all of that. So it's not surprising that the catalyst that led to Plato was the work of educational psychologists and behavioral psychologists in the 50s. And the leader of that movement was B.F. Skinner at Harvard University. And he's a controversial figure, and he kind of led what was called the behaviorist movement. And I start the book with a chapter that gives some background on him and what led him to be so passionate about improving education. The thing that he thought was broken with education was essentially, you could say, everything. He felt that he witnessed a typical classroom setting with in his daughter's fourth grade arithmetic class, and he saw the teacher walking up and down the hall, the aisles of the classroom. The students were all working on little math problems that she had written on the board. And some students would finish the assignments earlier than others. But then nobody would get their work turned back to them graded until probably the next day. And this just really frustrated Skinner. He thought everything should be instantaneous. You should get immediate feedback. You should be able to work at your own pace and not have to wait. If you're done way before the kid sitting next to you, why should you have to suffer and be bored and frustrated and that kind of thing? So he felt that the best way to get learning to happen was that everyone learn at their own speed and get feedback about whether they're right or wrong on tests and quizzes and everything right away. So he realized that was going to be really hard to do with one teacher and, say, a classroom of 20 kids. And so he thought, well, maybe if we automate the process of education, which in a way is this gigantic leap. I mean, even today, I marvel at the leap in the thinking, it's just bold ambition and probably some arrogance and perhaps a little ignorance about the learning process and everything, but he was a total believer in what he was doing. So he built a contraption called a teaching machine, which is, when you look at it now, it looks so primitive. It's basically a wooden box with a bunch of gears and pulleys and the equivalent of punched paper inside. That's kind of like torn out of a miniature player piano or something. A real Rube Goldberg device. And with a tiny little hole on it, that where inside it might say 3 + 2 =, and then you would move some sliders to indicate, what the answer was, and then you'd go kerching, like a slot machine, and find out whether you got the answer right or not. And you wouldn't be allowed to move forward to the next question until you got the right answer. So it was kind of, this is where the behaviorist stuff comes in, where you're kind of, in a way, forced to figure out the right answer before you can move on and that sort of thing. And then the reward for moving on is the right answer. Well, it was really obvious that this kind of approach was interesting, and the field of psychology and the fields of education exploded with interest all during the 1950s. You go back and you can find all kinds of articles about this stuff, even in widespread mainstream, magazines like the Saturday Evening Post and stuff like that. So it was really talked about. It was both controversial but fascinating to everybody in the bold new future of the late 50s, technology taking over. But then, as things kept going, it was pretty obvious that this was not going to scale. And that the creation of the material was so painstaking, and the grading of it and checking of the final scrolls of paper was so primitive that it was just agonizing. And a different group of people, computer science and hardware engineers and all that, realized that they could automate all this stuff in software on a computer and eliminate a lot of those hassles and problems and that sort of thing. And so that was starting to be an idea. And around the same time, the Soviets launched Sputnik, which created in 1957, late 57, so 60 years ago. That created a huge furor in the United States about whether we are falling behind the Soviets in terms of science and math and engineering, what we might call STEM today. And that led very quickly to the creation of ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency of the Department of Defense, and NASA, and also lots and lots of money to fund improvements to education. And so there was all this money flowing around at the very time that teaching machines and that thinking was exploding. So those two factors came together, and then with the introduction and the sort of becoming starting to be widespread availability, at least in universities and companies, of early computers. They were big mainframes and that kind of thing. You had a perfect storm. And Plato arrived in 1960, right at the cusp of all of this stuff coming together. And the University of Illinois said, we should experiment and build a system and see if there's anything to this idea of automatic teaching. Again, sort of the leap just kept going, this leap that you have to make mentally, that, a box with some circuits in it and disk drives or whatever is going to be as patient and as interesting and as empathetic and mentoring and caring as a living human teacher. And that's a big leap, and yet they went for it. And so the whole part one of the book is about this development of Plato out of the Skinner stuff, and being engineering driven, and by electrical engineers and that kind of thing. They were not tied to what you'd say today as they were sort of agnostic when it came to all this stuff about behaviorism and all that. They felt that, we don't particularly care how you teach. We just want to build a box, a machine, a system that lets, students learn however is best for them to learn, and lets teachers teach however they think is best for them to teach. We'll just build a really flexible platform that's has as many tools as needed to let people create chemistry lessons and simulations and arithmetic and math and French and Latin and any subject matter imaginable from K through 12 all the way up into university level stuff. And so that's the whole first 10 years of Plato were all about that.